welcome back to the channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that and give us the thumbs up. We really do appreciate it. So this is episode 1 of the new podcast interview series that we're doing over lockdown, obviously while we can't go out. We've got a pretty cool guest today, Patrick Liddy from the States. He lives in LA. He is in the Lamborghini Young Driver program, so he races for them and things like that. And we're going to talk through, getting into racing and things like that. So without further ado, I suppose I better give him a call.
Hey man.
Hey, what's going on?
Not much. How you doing? I'm trying to.
Yeah, not too bad. What's it like for you over there? Are you?
It's not terrible. I'm just training, coaching. Obviously not racing at the moment, but kind of making the best of it. What about you guys over there?
Oh, we're on lockdown.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, for anyone that's not aware, why don't you tell us about yourself and what you do for Lamborghini?
Sure. So my name's Patrick Liddy. I'm 22 and I'm in the Young Driver program for Lamborghini. So basically what that means is I've raced with Lamborghini in the Super Trofeo race series, and we also represent Lamborghini in all of the corporate events, Sperienzas, press releases for cars, and we're generally developed by the Lamborghini program. So we visit the factory, do simulator runs, and there's young driver shootouts every year to try to select a few lucky young drivers to go on and compete with Lamborghini's factory team.
So how do you get into something like that?
Well, it's kind of interesting. I didn't really start in go-karts or anything that most people consider normal start to motorsport. I actually started on autocross, which is kind of unconventional. So I was 12 or 13, and my dad had this built-up race car that he was doing the autocross events with. So I would go out and practice and set up just cone courses. And by the time I was 15 or 16, I started to get on track. But I never really had a coach or anything, so it was kind of all self-taught, and I never really expected it to really go anywhere. I wasn't, trying to compete and learn and become a pro driver. But once I started to do some club races in the Radical Cup series and some Spec Miata, Lotus Cup cars, things like that, I realized that I was pretty good at it, and I ended up doing one endurance race. It was called the 25 Hours of Thunder Hill, and that was kind of the catalyst for everything. We did really well in the Radical prototype, and about 6 months later, I'm still in college, but my first year in college, I got a call from a buddy who I had done that race with, and he said, "Hey, there's 2 weeks until the first Super Trofeo Lamborghini race at Mid-Ohio. Our driver just canceled. Can you make it out and meet us at the race and drive?" And I was kind of taken aback, like, wow, this is like my lucky break. So that was kind of how my association with Lamborghini started. So I went out to that race, had never driven a GT car before, and did the amateur division. Super Trofeo has a couple different divisions. So we competed in that, and I ended up winning the race. So the team came back and said, "Hey, we'd love to continue the relationship with you." I did a couple more races that year. And then last year, 2019, was my first professional full series.
That's cool. So the 25-hour race, was that just you racing solid?
No. So most endurance races, like the Daytona 24, Spa 24, Nürburgring, you name it, Le Mans, they have 4 drivers or 3. Some of the prototypes have 3. At Le Mans, you can do 3, 4. But yeah, I don't think anyone could drive for 25 hours straight in a car like that. It's already pretty grueling enough as is.
Yeah. So it's all just natural ability.
Yeah, it's well, I've always said that, natural ability helps, but you have to train it. All the Formula One guys have natural talent, but they train every day. You look at Lando and Verstappen on the sim every day. They all have been karting since they were 5 years old. The best way to get faster in racing is to practice.
So let me just consult my notes. So what did you do before, obviously, all of the racing? Did you just school, things like that?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I used to be really into remote control cars, and I was watching this documentary that Lewis Hamilton was too. So obviously that's the secret, right? If you wanted to get into racing, but no, I did that, and I actually do think it kind of helped a little bit with your hand-eye coordination, and you learn how to set up a race car. They have the same kind of adjustments as a real car: toe, camber, caster, ride height, suspension setups. You can change the springs and even aero. So that was a good learning tool for me, and obviously I loved anything that went fast. And then I did some mountain bike racing, which I also think kind of helps you be an athlete, because a lot of people don't realize how physical racing is, especially in the GT cars where it gets so hot. So some of the things that I did earlier before I raced, I think definitely played a part into how well I do now. But like I said, there's no replacement for practice in racing.
Mm. So are you like part of a team?
Yeah. So it's kind of an interesting game in racing that most people don't understand. It's not like there's a Lamborghini racing team. There's a Lamborghini factory driver, but even Lamborghini doesn't have like a works team. Porsche does, Corvette does, but what a lot of these manufacturers do is they have a third-party team that's very closely associated with the factory. In this case, it's FFF. So they send drivers and they support those teams, and they support almost every team. So basically, what my job is as a driver, even associated with Lamborghini, is to go out and find a ride or a seat, we call it. So they'll help us out with racing costs, whether it's a free race car to use for the year, and reduced race entry fees, tires, things like that. But we still have to go out, find sponsorships, and work with teams.
I see. So you might find yourself racing for one team, on one race, and then moving across to another team by the next race.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we can even go into different disciplines. For example, this year, I'm planning on doing some GT3 stuff as well. Maybe even some LMP3, the Le Mans prototypes. It goes 1, 2, 3. So basically the slowest of the bunch, but they're still quite fast.
Well, it's a lot further than me. I've never, other than track days, I've never done any sort of racing or anything like that.
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of people want to get into motorsport, and they do track days, and they don't really know what the next step is. But really, the next step is just doing it. You can go out and find seats, and there's plenty of amateur drivers. That's kind of what the market is these days. Wealthy people pair up with professional drivers, and there's a lot of pro-am, we call it, class. So especially in cars that you split, for example, the endurance race, say Le Mans, there's a pro-am class. So an amateur guy with a big company who wants to promote it would basically say, all right, I'm going to hire these 2 pro drivers. They're going to be paid salary or not. And I'm going to fund the entire racing effort.
Crazy. Like, I wish I could promote this business through it.
Yeah, exactly. It is pretty crazy. I mean, you look at a race like Daytona or Le Mans, and you're talking like $500,000 to $1 million to race one car in that race.
That's crazy. So I'm guessing that's all of it though. Track insurance, parts, labor, teams, whatever.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting actually how the race in the U.S. is more expensive than in Europe, um, mostly because of labor costs and transportation. So for us, we're based out of California. So our cars had to go from California to New York and back again, and then to Alabama and California back again. And you keep going along this tour of the racetracks. So we have tens of thousands of miles that the trucks are driving a year, and that's huge cost. Truck drivers and all the maintenance costs associated with that. And apparently our labor is also quite a bit more expensive. So for any one race car, you have 3, 4, 5 people doing the mechanical work, the engineering, tire changing, kind of more menial tasks. So it's a big production for sure.
Yeah, I heard that the truck drivers that just drive the cars around get paid an absolute wedge.
Yeah, I'd imagine so. Obviously, we don't really deal with that too much as drivers, but I know that it's a circus to try to get a team coordinated.
Yeah, I bet. But I suppose it's the same as like F1 teams just constantly traveling throughout the season.
Exactly. I mean, luckily we don't do quite as many races across vast distances like F1 does. I mean, there's really nothing like F1 uh, anywhere in the racing world. I mean, you look at their budgets are $500 million, which is kind of crazy. So obviously nothing's at that level, but everything in racing, kind of follows that same flow.
Have you got any aspirations to get into anything like that?
Well, as you probably know, there's no Americans in F1, um, and that's probably for a reason. But I think in reality, when you're in Europe, you are part of that ladder system, that bracket system, and if you're not in that program very young, it's very difficult to do that. But at the same time, I'm working with some bigger sponsors this year, and where you have a lot of plans going on. So you never know when someone could say, "Hey, I want to start the next US F1 team that's going to be way better than Haas." You'd hope, and have a go at it. But you can always dream about that. But in reality, I think my goal is to continue the GT racing. And ideally, I'd love to get into the prototypes a little bit more because that's what I started in. So the LMP2 in the US, it's going to be LMDH, which is kind of like the DPI equivalent over here in the US. So that would be very cool, I think.
But going back to what you said about racing F1 in Europe and what have you, America's got such a vast culture of racing. I mean, drag racing alone, it doesn't really happen anywhere in Europe.
Right.
So, I mean, you could just stay in America and go through any discipline of racing that there is, really.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly have a big racing culture. Obviously, everyone knows that we love NASCAR here in America. And I used to kind of brush off oval racing, but once you're there and you get a feel for how much engineering goes into the oval racing and how dangerous it is, really. I mean, how on the edge you are all the time. It's definitely something that I can respect a lot. So NASCAR is very cool. The dirt track cars are amazing. In fact, I just did an off-road test early last week. So it's cool to be able to check out all these different disciplines and kind of bring back some of the knowledge to the racing that you want to do. So yeah, I think we have plenty of racing here in the U.S. and the level is very high, especially in the IMSA series. So I'm perfectly happy racing here, but I think in reality, it's everyone's dream, no matter where you are, to race at tracks like Spa, Nürburgring, Monza, Paul Ricard, the F1 circuit.
So obviously you're 22. How do you deal with like the pressure of having to find your own sponsors and leading up to a race?
Yeah, that's probably the hardest part is finding the funding, as most people quickly realize in racing. It doesn't really matter how fast you are if you can't bring any value to the team. Obviously the very, very top guys, the factory drivers are fast, but they're also great brand ambassadors to their brands. You look at Earl Bamber, Patrick Long, they're kind of marketing themselves as drivers, in addition to being really fast. So they're doing all sorts of work for Porsche. They're doing the commercials. With Lamborghini, it's kind of the same thing. I've done a couple commercials for the Urus and stuff, and try to do my very best to be as valuable as possible to them. But also, it's a big commitment for a lot of the brands to sponsor you and bring that money to the team. So you really have to kind of look at it from their perspective and think, all right, what am I doing for this brand, for this race, and how can I keep them on for the next race?
I mean, that's crazy. At 22, I would have had no idea about contracts and funding and things like that. I was just being a typical 22-year-old, yeah?
Right. Well, trust me, everyone makes their fair share of mistakes. I've made plenty of oversights in mine, contractual sponsorship wise, but you just kind of have to jump into it and just try it out. That's what I get a lot of messages about people asking, oh, how can I start racing? How can I get sponsorship? How do you do what you do? And I always respond and say, you just have to kind of jump into it and figure it out.
Um, Actually, as a company, we're looking into at the minute. Have you ever heard of banger racing?
Have I ever heard of? Sorry, broke up.
Banger racing.
Banger racing.
Yeah. So it's huge, especially in this part of the country, where people just take, really beat up crap cars, and you take like it's like a huge dirt circuit, but it's a full contact racing. The cars rarely survive, but that's what we're looking into at the minute. And I didn't realise how much of a following it had over here.
Right.
But I suppose that it's come from a cheap form of racing that they love in America. That's lemon. Yeah.
Yeah, lemon. So I was gonna say it sounded just like lemons, but that's an awesome series, and I've actually had a lot of friends that have done it. I haven't yet done it, but it looks like a blast. I mean, that's the most fun you can have in a car. So you guys are looking into doing that?
Yeah. So possibly next year, I think. Obviously, once lockdown's over and stuff, we can do a lot more. But we're looking at putting a team together, and yeah.
That's pretty awesome. My friend has a sticker on his helmet, and you have a gear inspection and safety tech at every race, no matter what series it is. And usually there's very professional stickers. You get an IMSA certification sticker. This helmet's certified. The Lemon series says this gear is good enough. It's pretty funny.
I think it's brilliant. Like you don't have to worry about the car surviving. It's probably worth 200 quid. Whereas you're racing in super expensive cars that have to survive.
Yeah, right. I mean, that is the core of racing right there. You look at the Miatas, and I think the car my friend raced had a actual surfboard attached to the top of it on the racetrack. But yeah, I think you guys should definitely do that. It's a blast to be able to, bang around, touch bumpers, knock someone's mirror off, and have really close racing like that. Doesn't get any better.
But you do all the you've got things like Destruction Derby over there that don't exist here.
Well, we don't have that here in California. I can tell you that for sure.
Oh yeah.
But I've personally never seen it, but I would enjoy go in one of those things. I don't think I would want to drive in it, but yeah, that's definitely fully American.
Oh yeah, definitely in the south.
Yeah.
So yeah, going back to going away from the lemon racing. So what sort of process do you go through building up to a race? Is what you eat controlled and things like that, or?
Yeah, it's all controlled. It really depends on your commitment level. So the higher the race series, pretty much the more serious you are about it. When I was just starting out racing, I didn't really do anything. And as I started to get into the more serious racing, I I started to have to look at my hydration, especially because in the GT cars, so Trofeo specifically, we don't have any AC, and you have the V10 engine right behind you. So it's ridiculously hot in the cabin. It's like 120, 130 degrees Fahrenheit. And we race in the south in the middle of summer. So it's crazy high humidity and it's 90 something degrees. So you really have to hydrate well and have a lot of electrolytes, or else you can. I mean, I've known people to get heat stroke and pass out, not in the car, but once they got out. So you really have to be careful and prepare for the heat, especially. But other than that, it's just kind of eating well and being mentally prepared to be in the car.
Mm. That's crazy. I want to talk about. So you drive a truck,
Yeah.
and I'm quite jealous about your truck, to be honest. So why don't you tell everyone what you drive first off?
Well, I know that you were surprised to hear that I drive a Raptor, but a lot of the California culture is the surfing, the mountain biking, and you can't forget the go-karting. So I actually do go-kart a lot now. So I can toss whatever I need in the back of that truck, my go-kart, my mountain bikes, surfboard, whatever, and just go and have some fun. And it's great off-road, and it's pretty fast. It's the V6 twin-turbo EcoBoost with the 10-speed Scotch shifter paddles on a truck, which is kind of fun. And I don't know, I really enjoy it.
Obviously, you can get away with it over there because of the size of your roads and stuff like that. But have you? Oh, go on, sorry.
It just about fits my parking garage. It's about 2 inches lower than the top of the roof.
But California's got some really strict rules on cars and what have you, isn't it?
Yeah, smog. There's tons of state tax on them. They can't have a lot of exhausts. They can't have, well, I think most places you can't have slick tires, but I was pulled over for that one time. There's all sorts of kind of ridiculous rules in California.
I couldn't do it. I mean,
Yes.
Like we can pretty much do whatever we want here as long as you declare it to your insurance and things like that. But I couldn't live in a state where I couldn't have a loud exhaust or anything like that.
Yeah, I was just reading an article that they gave out like 150 loud exhaust tickets in Los Angeles this weekend, just because they're cracking down because people are tending to go out a little bit more now. They're getting a bit stir crazy, I think, at home.
Yeah, but that's quite a recent rule about the exhaust, is it not?
Yeah, I believe it was last year or something. And sometimes I drive around a Shelby GT350R, and I believe that's like the third loudest production car exhaust. I mean, it's ridiculously loud. And I've been pulled over multiple times, and I have a paperwork from the dealer. My buddy works at the Ford dealership that I go to, and he said, "You're really going to want to carry this around." So I just show this proof of authenticity of the certificate that the exhaust is factory and what to check under the exhaust, and you're good to go.
That's crazy. So have you never thought about driving a Lamborghini or some other sports car just in your personal life? Or
Yeah, it's funny. I think a lot of pro race car drivers don't tend to drive sports cars a lot. Obviously, I love looking at them and driving them, especially on track. But when you're driving them at such a high level on the racetrack, it's not quite as appealing to drive on the street. You kind of want to just relax when you're driving on the street. And if you're in a sports car, it almost feels like work.
Yeah, I suppose. So I love JDM cars. Like they're my favourite. But I get asked a lot, sort of, you've got £1 million. What's your dream car? But they're all like, less than £50,000. Just modified. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I guess the dream cars are pretty approachable. I've always loved the older GTRs, the Supras. They're very cool. I haven't really driven a lot of JDM stuff, but I'd like to. But I think my draw is like the vintage stuff. I love the classic air-cooled Porsches, some of the old Jags, even the American cars.
You get that? You're looking at serious money for old Porsches now.
That's for sure. I mean, you can buy, I guess, some of the more modern ones, the 996 or 993, but yeah, the 70s and 60s ones are pretty crazy money right now.
I think the new Porsches that they're bringing out are actually cheaper. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, that is kind of crazy. You have a 72 RS going for $1 million.
No, Porsches are cool. I follow quite a lot of the Porsche guys. So Nakai and Magnus Walker obviously lives. I think he lives in California actually.
Yeah, I know Magnus as an acquaintance. Helped him sell a car, and we DM back and forth on Instagram a little bit. He's a pretty good driver actually.
Yeah, I read his book recently. Obviously, he's a British guy, and he lives quite close to where I grew up. So it's crazy to see his story of obviously him moving over there and getting huge.
Yeah, it is crazy. I mean, his association with Porsche, and I guess they just appreciate what he loves to do, and he certainly does it well. He's got great taste in cars, and it's funny. He actually lives about 10 minutes away from me now. So.
Yeah, well, everyone in LA is famous. It's just where you all go.
Yeah, it doesn't quite feel. I think everyone thinks they're famous in LA. Maybe is a more accurate analysis, but it's definitely a cool place here.
I've never been, but in my head, everyone's vegan. They're all going around drinking soy lattes and things like that.
There's definitely parts of that here for sure, but I'll tell you that most people in LA are not that crazy, luckily, and there's not too many vegans around. At least very active vegans.
So where did you grow up originally?
In LA, so in the Valley, the Kim Kardashian. The famous Valley, right? But then I went to school up in Santa Barbara, in Pasadena now.
So, what? Obviously, going back on topic. What sort of advice would you give people? You say you get asked a lot, just to, break into that. Maybe they've not got a huge budget, to get into racing.
Yeah, it's a tough question because there's a lot of ways to do it. Unfortunately, none of which are really cheap. But there's a couple things that you can do that sort of help. And I'd say the first step is definitely a good simulator. I'm actually sitting in my simulator chair right now, but I did it a lot when I was little on Gran Turismo, and that's fantastic with a couple $100 wheel and you bolt it to your desk and you're good to go. And just getting that feedback from the wheel and the steering inputs and the line choice is huge, developing that from an early age. And obviously everyone's a gamer these days. So you can also do iRacing on your PC. So there's a whole wealth of knowledge there. iRacing is a little bit more accurate. Other than the simulators, I would say it's great to get into any sort of racing that you can, no matter what class it is, whatever you can afford. And don't be afraid to go out to friends, family, local businesses and say, hey, this is what I'm doing, and I'd love to represent you guys and have your support. And it's always good to think about what you can do for them instead of kind of holding your hat out and asking for money to go racing, which is kind of the temptation. And then it's just keeping working. There's no natural talent that's going to bring you all the way to professional driving. You can't just plop into a seat and be fast, as fast as a factory driver, or a lot of people think that they will be, but you really have to work hard for it and study it. There's tons of articles online, podcasts. I really like the Ross Bentley Speed Secrets podcast. Yeah, listen to that. But it's really just a matter of not giving up and keeping going on.
Yeah, that's cool. But thanks for joining us. Obviously, this is the first podcast type thing that we're going to do while we're all on lockdown. But obviously, the time difference is a bit crazy. But yeah, thanks for joining us, and hopefully we can speak again in the future. And we're planning on doing some different trips away. So hopefully, if we end up in LA,
Yeah, swing on by the race shop. I'll show you guys around.
Definitely.
Yeah, it was a pleasure talking, and I think we'll have to do it again sometime soon.
Oh, definitely. All right. So I hope you enjoyed that. Patrick's a super down-to-earth bloke, like I said before. I plan on doing a few more episodes of the podcast before lockdown's over. So don't forget to subscribe so you can get the notifications. And I'm just going to basically hound people until they come on the channel. Don't forget to check the links in the video description. There's all sorts of stuff in there. The new shop is now up and running. So I'll drop the link below. All things like that. And I'll see you on the next episode.